And away we go.
All right.
Coming to you from the Java Dome, Tinker HQ in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana, it's the Psychic Derailleur podcast. Now, this is the point where normally I would have like a sound effect or some kind of
applause.
Well, that's a little over the top, but you know, a jaunty tune perhaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't have the budget for that.
That's okay.
My guest today is the one and only Nick Legan. Born Carmel or born in Indianapolis?
Nearby, born in Franklin, Indiana, actually.
Yeah.
And then grew up Indianapolis area.
As near as makes no difference.
Yeah.
Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But has set the bicycling world on just aflame.
That's what it needed. Some fire.
Yeah, well, yes, it does. So instead of me trying to do this from memory, why don't you just give the fine folks, the 7.5 people plus my mother that listen to this.
Well, my mom will listen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
8.
Yeah.
Give the folks a little rundown.
Sure, yeah. So born and raised here.
A palmaris, if you will.
Absolutely. Born and raised here. Got into cycling through the Boy Scouts, actually. When I was 12, started road racing when I was 13. And then raced kind of, since then. Went to Indiana University, did some collegiate racing there, spent some time abroad, which was really fun in France. Moved to Boulder, Colorado right after school. And got to work in a really high-end road shop there called Pro Peloton. That's still around. It's changed hands a few times. But working there, I got to meet a lot of pros. So at the time, there were a lot of U.S. Postal guys were living in Boulder, and some pro women that were there at the time, and got into the pro wrenching scene then, starting in 2004. And then 2005, started doing that full-time with teams, so kind of traveling vagabond / hobo / mechanic guy, and did that for, I think it was 8 seasons, full time on the road. And that was a mix of working here in the U.S., working in Europe, lived in Luxembourg, Belgium, Spain, spent some time in Australia, went to the Olympics in Beijing, which was really cool, an incredible opportunity. Transitioned from that to go work for, I started my own bike shop with a partner of mine, another pro mechanic named Damian Shanks. We had a service-only bike shop in Boulder. Very service-oriented, very quick turnaround, very not scalable because it was highly dependent on the two of us just working on bikes. But it served its purpose. It was great. We never incurred debt. And in Boulder, there's a huge sponsored scene. So instead of negatively reacting to someone bringing you parts to have installed on their bike, we were like, absolutely, let's do this. And then, in fact, we kind of got into cahoots with a lot of their sponsors, saying, you just ship it directly to us. They'll bring their frame in and we'll install it. And it was, in that town, it's a really viable model. I don't know that you could do it in Indianapolis necessarily, but in a lot of places it works out really well. There's also a big cyclocross scene there, so we were charging a lot of money to glue tubulars, and people wanted them to stay on, so they would pay it. So I started that, and I actually kind of did that for quite some time while my partner then did it more predominantly. And then he was still traveling as a mechanic some with teams and cyclocross teams. And then I went to work for Velonews as the technical editor there for a couple of years.
And were you doing that when we met in D.C.?
Yeah, I was working at Velonews as the tech editor when I did Ride on Washington with Tim Johnson. And then we met lobbying basically at the Capitol.
Summit, right.
Exactly. That was a really fun thing. Tim, I'd known from I'd been one of his mechanics on the road scene, and he invited me to do that. And Velonews was gracious enough to let me do it because it was definitely. I mean, I was paid to review bike parts, not go talk about advocacy. And they let me talk about advocacy, which I still think is really important, obviously. So did that for a while. Then I kind of did transition into the PR and marketing side of things, worked for an agency, and we had clients like Shimano, Giant Bicycles, Bell Helmets, Michelin Tires. And then I also worked in the power sports industry. So I did a lot of work with Honda motorcycles for some time. That was 3 years. left that to come back to the editorial side and make less money with Adventure Cyclist, but a mission that I really identify with.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because it's an interesting organization because it's, as much as they do, they're known for, their trips and their maps.
Right.
I mean, it's also an advocacy organization.
Without a doubt, yeah.
So, and you were there for how long?
I did 3 years, I think, with them.
So in the 3 years that you were there, I mean, what's your take on the state of advocacy? It's always been a hard word for me to say.
It is, yeah. Even harder to do.
Well, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that? What's the state of advocacy? Because I can, excuse me. We're doing this early in the morning, folks. I only see it from inside my little bubble of Indianapolis, which is, it's a funny place. And it's the advocacy in this state, in this town, seems to have stagnated.
And you're talking about like IndyCog, for instance.
Which is now Bike Indianapolis.
Okay. See, I'm not in the loop.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but on a national level,
yeah,
because I would think at Adventure Cyclist you had a little bit more of a handle on what was going on nationally. I mean, what's going on out there?
It's a good question, and I think to answer your question kind of bluntly is I don't know, and I say that partially because my job wasn't directly in advocacy for Adventure Cyclist. It was reviewing camping gear and bicycles and things like that. So I wasn't directly involved. I can say that while I was there, the Adventure Cycling Association reached its largest membership ever. And that has nothing to do with me. But that's a good sign that people are paying the dues, literally, and getting the magazine and learning and getting inspired to ride their bike, to travel by bike. And my understanding is it's continued to grow. So that's a good thing. People are getting involved. If there's a downside, it's that it's probably the people who you expect to be involved in bicycle advocacy. And it's not to put anyone down, but it's not exactly a youthful demographic.
Right.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
The hope that I see on the horizon, though, has more, and I know that cycling as an industry tends to be, in my opinion, far too racer-focused, but I do think that what NICA is doing is very exciting, and creating high school leagues in mountain biking. I would love to see them do more in gravel, because I think a lot more places, certainly in the Midwest, have access to gravel roads that are...
Not here.
Well, not everywhere, but I do think that they're creating a love for cycling and a nice atmosphere for kids to be on bikes, and that's fun.
Yeah, so on the one hand, I would agree with you, and on the other hand, it's one of my biggest problems with the industry being so focused on racing. And from this respect, I don't really see it as a benefit getting them started that early, is that you're dealing with people that are collectors, right? These are guys that every year went out and bought a new driver because it was going to add 10 yards to their drive. And instead now they're buying a new bicycle or a new drivetrain or this new thing. Mm-hmm. And as soon as those people, whomever they are, and I'm going to say guys because I think predominantly it's men, we like stuff. As soon as they figure out that they can't stay with the B group, or they're never going to get to the A group, or they can't stay with the A group because they're, 45 years old and they've got 2 kids and they got a job and they got a wife and they got a life. Mm-hmm. They're not going to go buy a long haul trucker and go start riding rail trails on the weekends. More than likely. Yeah. There will be some outliers, but more than likely they're not going to do that. They're going to take that money that they were spending on bicycles and they're going to start kite sailing or drone racing, or they're going to go back to golf, or they're going to take up fly fishing. They're going to funnel that money into something else. Yeah. So I don't think that the industry has, over this last 20 years, and let's go back further because it probably started with Greg. they're not making cyclists. What they did was they
made compelling stuff.
They made stuff for people to buy, which is what they wanted. But all they did was they made consumers. They took a consumer that was buying something somewhere else, and got them to buy their stuff. They're not making lifelong cyclists. So while I would hope that if you get them started early, you can show them some different aspects of it. Most of these kids have fathers that if they're not, all in on the latest and greatest stuff, they're going to be. I mean, they're going to use that as an excuse to go buy a new full suspension mountain bike because I got to go ride with Junior.
Sure.
So
I still don't see a negative though in what you're saying. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just don't know that. I think we can do both. Is what I'm getting at. I think we need to do both.
Absolutely, and I hope that that's the plan. But from what I've seen over the years, it's all about the